Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. If there's any problems, do say. So I'm here to talk to you about performance management, a subject very passionate for me, maybe not so for many of you out there, but hopefully I'll change that mindset from today's session. So if we flip to the next slide, please, and the next one, thank you. So what we're going to cover today is look at what it is, performance management, and why it is important, contrary to some beliefs out there. We'll have a real fast look at SMART objectives, what they are, and then the importance of one-to-one meetings, and importantly, how you prepare both as an employee and as a manager for an appraisal, the dreaded appraisal. Most people look at those as having an interview or having an exam. It's not a pleasant time of the year, but we will turn that around from today's discussion. And then we'll look quickly towards the end at feedback and how you plan on career development. So lots to cover. As always in my sessions, I jam loads of content and have to race through. So if I am gibbering on a bit too much, hopefully you'll be able to take the slides away later. And if there is anything that wasn't covered, you are more than free to contact me at any stage and I'll be happy to explore it further. Okay, so I have a question for you. If we can pop to the first or the next, So I would like to get your honest opinion, and please don't say what I want you to hear. I want you to tell me what you really truly believe at this stage. Do you think performance management is a waste of time? Is it a process that is occasionally used but not really effective? Or is it a process that is occasionally used, a valuable tool to help manage employees? Please be honest. I want to really hear what you think. Okay. So, yep. A couple more seconds, 10 seconds. We'll see what everyone thinks. Okay, so a larger majority think it is a valuable tool, which is pleasing to see. I see with a lot of clients that I work with, the middle category, a process that is occasionally used, but it's just a tick box is what I'm hearing more often than not. So there's quite a few that believe that, and some, zero for a waste of time. Okay, interesting. Thank you for that honest answer. Hopefully we'll shift more of you to the valuable tool belief by the end of this session. If we just move on to the next question, just quickly so I can see who is using performance management at the moment. If you can just tell me if you are currently using performance management to manage your employees at the moment, or if you're not, or if you would like to, but you just don't know how to do it. Okay. Okay, so a lot of you are using performance management, which is good. Some would like to, but don't know how. So hopefully we'll certainly help those people today. And a couple of you aren't. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your honesty. I really do appreciate that. Let's move on to the next slide. So just a bit of boring content. Performance management, for those of you who don't know, it says it on the screen. It really does help accomplish or facilitate work through other people. You're helping people achieve objectives, achieve key KPIs as the first basis of what you're trying to achieve. But you're also giving direction to employees, giving them structure about what they should be doing. And the key sort of final piece to that is helping them progress, helping them become a better version, helping them become, promoted, next level, become a manager, etc. It's a continuous cycle. It shouldn't, contrary to what many people tell me, it shouldn't just happen once a year. I always speak to people who say, oh gosh, it's December, got to do performance management, a wrap up of the year. What has that person done well? Gosh, so it's not that. It should be happening on a daily basis to make it a truly effective performance management system. Good performance management will help everybody, employees, managers, people who are involved coaching other people. There's so many benefits. It should be a process that enables fairness across all employees if your process is being deployed consistently and objectively by management. So it should be fair. And really, it's there to measure, because there is no point doing anything if you're not measuring the effectiveness and the contribution from people. So you need good measurement in place and good objectivity. And the cycle also requires feedback. So it's not just a management to employee top-down cycle, it's giving back feedback both ways. So that's what I would like to see in a proper performance management process. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick cycle, a quick sort of view of what is involved. It really should start with your organizational's goals and values. So top down, what are the objectives of the business? And the senior leadership team should set their own objectives, which then should cascade down through to everybody's objectives throughout the organization. So you're all aiming to achieve the same thing. Obviously, the more senior roles are going to involve more strategic types of objectives, but they're all feeding through to achieve the same overall goal and mission of the business. Those objectives should be SMART, which we'll cover shortly, and should feed into everybody's individual objectives. Individuals then come to work every day, do their job, follow those objectives, maybe a job description as well, and also focus on where they're trying to achieve and what they're trying to do themselves throughout their career and their own personal journey. That should be tracked. Measurement, as I've already said, is important. It should be tracked through, you can get as scientific as you wish, or you can be more loose with it, but it certainly should be an objective that is tracked, which is SMART, which I'll cover, as I said. And feedback should be given, obstacles should be discussed, any issues along the way. It should be happening in a regular, frequent, once a week, once a fortnight, once a month, the very most time scale, so that things are being addressed as they're happening. And then the actual review should take place, performance review, a more structured review should take place, I would say at least twice a year, so 6 monthly, annually. But there should be no surprises at that time, because all the conversation's been happening throughout the track phase. So through your one-to-one management, through your one-to-one meetings, any issues are being addressed, feedback is given, positive feedback, negative feedback. So come the review stage, there's really no surprises. You're just completing a document on the basis of your discussions already. So that's the cycle. If we just move on to why we need performance management, employees need to have feedback, clearly, and they need to be able to raise issues. And for some people, busy lives, there's no time to have these conversations. But if you're making a time to sit down, have a one-to-one and track this information, it's a really, really good way to ensure priorities are addressed, performance is analysed, and any issues that need to be discussed are discussed. You're going to usually increase engagement once performance management is structured and in place and working fairly and consistently across the business. Engagement is something that is driven by lots of factors, but for people to get honest feedback, have conversations with managers about how they're going, that typically results in heightened engagement. It helps with the relationship between managers and employees, and it clearly does identify any potential issues. We use the analogy of a stone gathering moss. If there's something that is niggling somebody, whether it be the manager or the employee, and it's not addressed, it gets bigger and bigger, and suddenly you've got a massive boulder hitting you, and it's very difficult to deal with. If you deal with an issue in its infancy, it's usually more likely to be resolved. So that's why bringing these issues up regularly at your one-to-ones rather than at the end of the year is much better. Okay, let's move on. So if we look at two aspects of performance, for me, the you've got will and skill. They're the two aspects of how you would analyze somebody's effectiveness in their job. And for me, the skill is the easy thing to develop. So if somebody's perhaps failing to, I don't know, deliver a calibration exercise as part of their job, and they don't know how to calibrate effectively, it's a lot easier to help that individual with that skill of calibration by putting them on a training course, giving them some job shadowing, maybe having somebody sit with them, explain for a week to develop that particular skill. What is more difficult to address is the will. I'm not sure if people agree with me on that one, but with my experience working with a lot of companies on managing performance, the will is the intangible thing. How do you assess, appraise, identify somebody's behaviors and where they're not quite at the right level? It's harder to define what's not right. So the will is often the tricky area of managing. But again, if I go back to my analogy of a stone gathering moss or and becoming a boulder, if you address that initial niggle of maybe somebody is a little bit lazy on the job, never puts their hand up to help out with additional work, is just a bit lackluster, is perhaps often turning up late, those sorts of behaviors, and you sort of think, oh, how do I deal with that? That's a hard thing to deal with. But let me tell you, if you don't address those behaviors, if they're significantly impacting the work, then they will get worse, in my experience from having worked with a lot of companies and dealing with performance. So will and skill are two things that need to be looked at. And I think on the side of that, how to manage will and skill. If you're looking at managing skill and somebody's lack of ability to do a job, it's like I said, it's a bit easier to manage. If you look at managing will, you've got two potential policies that can run alongside of that. You might have somebody who is purposely being difficult, just not pulling their weight and doing a few things which perhaps could be lack of trust, maybe trying to go against company policy. You're looking therefore at involving a disciplinary policy alongside of that. If you've got somebody who is just incapable of performing their position, and it's a fact that their skill is just not at the right level, you keep training them, and nothing improves, you're then looking at a capability policy to try and help that person improve their performance. Two separate policies apply for two types of different development requirements. If you have those policies in place, it makes it a lot easier to address will and or skill. If you don't have them in place, again, I can discuss this offline at a later point. But they're two policies that will enable you to take those areas and work with them if you need to. Okay, let's just move on now to SMART objectives. I'm sure you've all seen this. I don't want to teach you to suck eggs, so I apologize if you know this like the back of your hand. However, most people have seen this, and I still get people going, oh, I just don't know how to put in place SMART objectives. Really, is it that necessary? For me, it's very necessary. And it should start with, like I said earlier, the cycle of performance management. You should have objectives fed down from the top, which mirror the top senior objectives, but are adapted for the particular role that the individual is performing at a lower level. It can be simple as, 5 key objectives overall, and then from those objectives, you can have your own individual job description, which may expand more so on those objectives. However you wish to do it, they have to be SMART. They have to be specific. And I sometimes bring an exercise to this training course where I give you a load of objectives and I ask you to tell me which ones are SMART and which ones are not SMART. I haven't done that on this occasion just because of time restraints, but there's a lot of debate about what is specific and what is measurable, etc. But effectively, if you are able to understand what a person is supposed to be doing from that particular objective. If there is a measure in place, i.e., by 100% completion within 4 days, those are the specific measures you're looking to see. It needs to be achievable. It's got to be relevant for that individual and realistic. And time bound is key. So by 6 monthly or whatever it might be. I also put those extra 2 points on effort and resources required, because it's important to understand that when you're appraising or assessing objectives, you should also consider the individual's effort, because sometimes things are beyond their control. In a world of COVID, things are often beyond our control, and certain tasks may be completely written off because of external factors. So it's important to be able to recognise somebody's effort. And this is where, again, it goes back to having specific objectives, specific measures. So if you're measuring time on job, for instance, that can sometimes equal to effort. Equally, resources, people may be hamstrung by lack of resource, lack of team. There's so much skill shortage at the moment. People might be doing 2-3 jobs at once. These sort of factors should be considered when you're looking at SMART objectives. But I won't spend any more time. I'm sure you all know that, but it's good to remind yourself. And I think what is important when you have a set of objectives in front of you, again, go through those 5 initial points and really challenge yourself about, is this specific enough? Is it being measured? Give it to somebody else, ask them that question. If you know the job, it's very easy for you to understand it, but can somebody else understand what you're trying to achieve, i.e. with measures? Okay, let's move on, please. My next slide. Oh, sorry, I have a question. I forgot about this one. My next question is about one-to-one meetings. So I'm keen to understand at the moment who is currently conducting regular, and that's the key in this question, regular one-to-one meetings. If you can tell me a yes or a no. So if you've got 5 employees that work for you, are you honestly having regular meetings on a one-on-one basis with your team? Okay, good. Okay, so there's quite a lot of you, 83%, which is great, really good. 11% have said no, which is fine, and 6% have said they would, but they're not sure how. Okay, good. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so this to me is the absolute crux of performance management. This is where the magic happens. Forget an appraisal form, 6 monthly, 12 monthly appraisal. If you're going to do anything following today's session, this is what you need to do and do it well. So a one-to-one meeting, however you choose to hold it, whether it be online, whether it be face-to-face, whether it be going for a walk, whatever is the right thing for yourself, is the key to having a regular discussion with your team individually, as it says, one-to-one. So what I would like to see happen in these meetings are any issues that individuals are dealing with at the time, workload, to talk about levels of work, what's being achieved, what's not being achieved. Importantly, what is going well for the individual, get them to open up and talk about that, what perhaps needs to be improved, training and development that might be required, any issues to be raised, manager feedback, and obviously keep this data somewhere on a form, on a piece of paper, on a spreadsheet, however you choose to do that. This meeting, I would say, should be driven by the employee, not by you as the manager. So the first thing I do when I take on board a new team member is I'll sit down and put in place in the diary, okay, these are the meetings for the year. This is when we're catching up. Or better still, send me a meeting request every week, month, whatever you choose, when you're ready, and we'll put in place those meetings. You're going to own those meetings, and we're going to have these regular discussions. Things happen, sometimes diaries clash and they have to be moved. But if you have to move a one-to-one meeting, make sure you do move it and don't cancel it. Often you're thinking, what is the point of having this meeting? Are we just going to sit and look at each other? I would say more often than not, these meetings do bring out things that you perhaps didn't expect. And it's really, really important to give your employees this airtime. But it's equally important for you to be able to give them, an update on business issues, external factors, and the things that we've talked about in that list there. I would normally start the meeting by encouraging the employee to begin the conversation. So I would go back to an open question and say to them, how's it been the last week, month, or however long the time has been? Open up to them and just let them speak. You've obviously got an agenda, you've got potentially a form that you might be completing, but it's up to them to just tell you what's been going well. And normally it's a very natural, fluid conversation, and some of those issues might come out. If you don't have the opportunity to get those issues out in a natural way, then you can use your form to go through that. It's important that you do give the individuals time to raise these issues, because, like I said, often issues that aren't raised, that they might be niggling, small, tiny problem that the employee might not want to raise at this point, or you might not want to raise at this point. If you don't, it's probably going to get bigger and bigger. We'll come on to feedback in a moment, but it's important that you are giving regular feedback at this session, both positive and positive and negative, and that individuals are equally able to give you feedback in the same way. Now, these conversations, however you choose to document them, should be documented, because they might require to be reviewed for information down the line. If it comes to head that something's happened, you might need to go back to an issue. So if somebody says, yeah, I've not been feeling particularly well at the moment, I'm feeling a bit stressed, and then in 3 months' time they have some time off work and they say, well, I spoke to you 3 months ago, remember, in our one-to-one, you can go back and and check on any of this information. So it really is important just to keep a summary of information from these one-to-ones. We have templates that we use. Again, I can share those with people, or you can just keep a loose script, but it's really important to document these and review them before you go into your next one-to-one meeting a week or a month later, so that you can have an ongoing conversation. Okay, if we could just move on, please. Those one-to-one discussions should then form the basis of your appraisal. So what I would say to people is that whether you conduct just an annual appraisal or a 6-monthly and an annual appraisal, I would be using the data from your one-to-ones to prepare as a manager, but also if you're keeping any information as an employee, to prepare as an employee for your appraisals. So as a manager, I would be asking you to look at all the data from the one-to-ones, any significant feedback that's been presented, any discussions, data from objectives that perhaps have or haven't been met, and put all that information in a document ready for a more formal appraisal. So if you think about it, appraisals are just a more formal way of discussing your one-to-one conversation. So appraisal, let's assume we do 6-monthly and 12-monthly. 6-monthly one is a more quick conversation, going through what you can see on the screen. As an employee, you're going to think about what you've achieved, your performance against your objectives, and try and come up with any evidence that would identify or highlight that. Any previous discussions you've had, any future considerations you're wanting to pursue, maybe certain developments you're looking to work towards, training, It might be that you're considering future positions, lateral moves potentially. And I would always encourage, sorry, there's a message there. Okay. I'm not sure, I can't see anything to answer a question. If you've got the chat function live. Okay, I'm not asked a question at the moment, so if you want to make any comments in the chat, please do, and I'll pick them up as we go.
There's nothing there at the moment, Victoria.
Pardon?
There's nothing, no questions in the chat at the moment.
Okay, fine, thank you. And I would also encourage people to do a 360 feedback, maybe not so for just the 6 monthly appraisal, but certainly for the end of year appraisal. Gather feedback from others and do this objectively. So do it with people that have had contact interaction with yourself. It might be customers, you might go external. Some companies don't prefer to do that. It might be team members, etc. But gather feedback from many sources if you can. So this preparation should be done prior to the appraisal. So I often hear people going, oh gosh, it's my appraisal's on Friday and I really can't be bothered turning up, or I'm just going to turn up and wing it and see what happens. If anybody turns up and wings it, whether you're the manager or the employee, I'd be cancelling that meeting straight away and coming back at a later date. It's a bit like an interview, an appraisal. You're having a good conversation. You're asking questions, you're giving feedback. Both parties should be preparing significantly for this appraisal. Otherwise, it is a waste of time and there is no point in having this conversation. So do make sure that you as a manager, and certainly you as an employee, are doing that time beforehand. So you're coming to the appraisal ready for a good hearty discussion. So that's one point I'd like to say about appraisals. If we just move on to the next slide. In the actual meeting of an appraisal, this is a suggestion that I've seen work very well for many of my clients. It's a conversation where the manager will introduce the discussion, but it's the employees that should have all the airtime. They should begin the performance discussion. Similarly to the one-to-one meeting, it's all about the employee. They will say where they've gone well, where they've, achieved against objectives. Allow them to really have that good conversation. You then, as a manager, will give your views, similarly to the one-to-one process. And then you'll start to talk about some of the areas whereby maybe you don't have the same agreements. And you start to talk about, yes, well, you've achieved this objective, but you haven't achieved this objective. And you're going back to your specific measures. If you've got specific SMART objectives in place, it's very easy, or more easy, I should say, to see whether those objectives have been met. If you're talking about you must complete customer calls within 3 rings 100% of the time, your stats on those customer calls will tell you whether that individual has or hasn't done that. So make sure those objectives are SMART, so that when you come to reviewing that information, it's a lot easier to do. Have those conversations. I would also say, if some companies like to put in place a lot of objectives, so you're talking 8-10 objectives per employee, which is quite a lot of objectives. So what I would always encourage is to think about, rather than assessing every objective and spending hours going through objective 1, objective 2, objective 3, look at what the employee has achieved, which is above expectations. So where you have assessed those objectives and they've really shone maybe in objective 1 and objective 3, and they've really gone out of the way to do a fabulous job, I'd be looking at those areas, the above expectations. And I'd also be looking at where the employee, unfortunately, has not been able to achieve their objectives, and look at areas where they've just a bit shy of that measurement, or quite significantly underperformed in a certain objective. The rest in the middle, where they've met, is par for the course. You're paying them a salary to do their job at the end of the day, as blunt as that sounds. Where I'd be focusing your energies as a manager is the top end, and the bottom end. The bit in the middle is what they're there to do, what they're there to come in every day and perform. Unless, of course, there's something which needs to be addressed, then I wouldn't spend that much time or any time on those met objectives. Focus on the top end and the bottom end. If you're having trouble to bring objectives to life, to explain how somebody may have not met the objectives, then you need examples. And this is where you go back to your one-to-one conversations. You've probably raised it back in May, back in June. You've discussed a specific issue where somebody perhaps was failing to deliver to a client or complete a document accurately. Whatever it was you were discussing, bring those examples to life so that the overall objective is complete all document content accurately 100% of the time. You can go back to May and June and July's one-to-one and say, remember we talked about this for 3 months in a row and you still weren't able to get 100% accuracy, and we discussed the reasons why. You explained there was nothing that was causing that, it was just you're a bit tired, etc. Bring those examples to life so that when you come to your actual appraisal, the individual isn't saying, you're just picking on me because you think I'm not part of the team. You've got no evidence that I've not met this objective. Again, your one-to-ones is where the magic happens. Your appraisals is just sealing the lid and putting it in a nice bow, if you like. Point 3 on this slide is really, really important. I would not ever focus on a one-off, sorry. You want to be sure that if you're raising an issue at the one-to-ones that might be a problem, it's a pattern. It's not just a one-off. So if somebody comes in tomorrow and says, oh, I just can't cope anymore, these tasks are just doing my head in, I'm really stressed, and fails to deliver for 1, 2, 3 days or whatever it might be, I wouldn't be marching that individual into a disciplinary and seeking a sanction at that point in time. What I would be doing the next one-to-one, if not before, is trying to understand what's happened. Again, go back to your open question. You seem a bit stressed. Are you okay? What's happened at the moment? Because a one-off is a one-off. We're all human. We're all allowed to have emotion and deal with personal situations that bring stress to work and often creates errors or objectives not to be met. What is important, though, is if this one-off stressful moment keeps happening and again and again and again and keeps impacting the job, then that's when you're going to start to raise this, because it's a pattern of behavior. And if we go back to the will and skill comments earlier, you need to start to address and understand, why is this pattern happening? It might be because there's some personal stress going on in this individual's life, and that's absolutely fine. But if you don't address that, then it potentially will get bigger. But make sure it's not a one-off performance issue that you're suddenly coming down on with a ton of bricks. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, please. The focus should be on, as I said earlier, efforts and input, not just completion of the task, which is important, but do consider the employee's efforts and input. Look at strengths and opportunities and development areas. So I do see a lot of appraisals happening where it's obviously assessment of the position and the objectives, and not a lot of time is spent on where this individual could potentially develop and grow in the future. And this is where businesses are missing a trick, because if you've got somebody particularly strong in a skill of, let's just say, communication, and you have some key skills gaps in the broader business area, which might require somebody with strong communication at a higher level, perhaps, or even just at a lateral level, by not addressing other development areas at this point in time, you're potentially cutting off opportunities for both the individual, but also the business. And I think businesses are missing a trick in that everybody's finding it really hard to find scarce skills, hard to fill positions, There's so many, not just, it used to just be IT, but now we've got lots of positions in hospitality, in many areas. I've got a lot of clients that are struggling to find staff. But if we look at our own backyard and look at our people in their appraisals and where they're strong and have a lot to offer, we can maybe not move somebody immediately, but maybe in 1 to 2 years. I know that's a long way down the line, but if we start to develop people using this appraisal data so they can progress across the business in the future, we are starting to resolve our own problems of scarce skills. So we need to be tapping into this appraisal data a lot more readily. Also focus on reasons for performance, both top performance and poor performance, and ask those questions. Why? This is the data. Is there anything we can explore, do differently? Is there anything that's creating this particular issue or pattern of behavior? And focus on inspiration to help people want to perform, want to improve and develop and take initiative. We have another workshop just by the way, next month. We're talking about talent development, so I'll explore this point in a lot more detail about how you can really inspire and tap into your existing resource in your business, and harness that talent. So if you are interested, come back in December, and I'm sure we'll share the links at some point. And think about people that, if they're told they're doing a good job, they want to succeed. It's about having even your top people being challenged. There's never just, oh, they're the top, they're the best, don't worry about them because they're so good. It's about challenging everybody regularly, because unless you show people that, well, maybe you could even go further with that particular client, keep stretching people, keep trying to get the best out of people. And this is the platform that you can use to develop people and really help your business progress and grow. And your position as a leader is to give that positive persuasion, look at opportunities where you can harness some of this talent, and also show others, show examples of how others are succeeding. Again, I go back to my point, even your top talent that is doing really, really well, by showing examples of other people in the business of how they've progressed and been promoted, that can often, make the appetite sort of hungry for people to continue to grow. So, equally looking at people on the lower end of where they're not performing, by showing examples of others around them who are succeeding and what they've done and extra initiative they've used, it can sometimes harness those individuals to want to exceed. It can also go the opposite way. I do appreciate that. But by having this platform to have these discussions, you can really harness the strengths with your employees. Okay, let's move on. I've waffled on far too long. I want to ask you a question here. We do have a Slido on this, so let me just take you through the scenario and get your opinion on how you think we should manage this. So it's a complete fictional scenario. We have Sue, who is a team leader, and she's worked for the company for 1 year. Now, when she first joined, she was very positive, enthusiastic, and very proactive. However, for the last 3 months, she has seemed distracted, and she's been quite late with her deadlines and her objectives, and she's just not been feeling it. She's got a very lackluster sort of approach. Now, she started having long lunch breaks, and she just seems disheartened. What do you do? I'm sure we've all had Sue working for us. The great employee that we've recruited, it's very positive, and suddenly it's all gone the opposite way. So I've got a few options to help you out. You might disagree with my options, but if we go to the Slido, I have said, would you invite Sue to a disciplinary meeting? Would you discuss with Sue at the next one-to-one? or would you discuss with Sue at her mid-year appraisal? Take some time to think about that. Okay. Good. Okay, so we have two different answers. Majority of people would discuss with Sue at the next one-to-one meeting. And we have a small percentage who said they would invite Sue to a disciplinary meeting. Can I be so bold to ask the person or people who suggested the disciplinary meeting any comments? Would you like to discuss? You possibly had someone recently, maybe. If you don't wish to, I'm absolutely fine with that. If you want to unmute yourself and just have a quick chat, but if not, fair enough.
We have had a comment popped into the chat box that says, I'd probably ask if she fancies a coffee in the initial instance, just to check on her in a more informal manner.
Okay, great. Nice, like that. Thank you, Laura. Okay, so we're exactly right. Laura's comments is exactly right. So you may have a conversation sooner rather than later, and a coffee is a great way of just checking in with Sue, seeing if she's okay. Most of you said the one-to-one meeting, which is probably where I'd go as well with that, and raise this conversation about how she's feeling, and start, as I said before, open up with an open question. Is everything okay? And don't ask anymore. I find with questions and difficult situations, the less you can say, the better. So rather than saying, oh, I've noticed you're having long lunch breaks at the moment and your performance has dropped, let's talk about it. Already my walls would have gone, boom, I ain't talking to you because you've just told me I'm bad. So instead I would say, hi Sue, should we go and have a coffee, as Laura suggested? How are things at the moment? Don't say another word. Let Sue speak. She might be a bit uncomfortable to say anything. She might open up, who knows? But if she says, oh yeah, well, I'm okay at the moment. Okay, no problem. Would you like to talk about, obviously go through niceties, how's your daughter, how's her college, blah, 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 blah. And then you get to the crux of the meeting. So how are you finding work at the moment? Open question, don't say another word. And the more open questions you can ask, not after immediately, but if she doesn't answer the question, hit her with another open question, there's more of a chance she will eventually come up with something. Because if obviously you give her a closed question, are you okay? She's going to say yes. If you say, how are you? She's going to say, well, actually, I'm not great at the moment, or whatever she says. So start open, start with an initial dialogue, and try and tease out how she's feeling. She might give you a lovely scenario that she's dealing with an aged parent at the moment, or something particularly similar to that. And that gives you some understanding of, well, why she's, why she's been having long lunches, why she's feeling lackluster. Who knows? But you may not get to it at this meeting. It might need another meeting, but the more you ask these questions in your one-to-ones, there's more of a chance that she's going to open up. Now, at some point, if she doesn't open up and you're still left with, you're not really positive, proactive, you're late with your deadlines, you are going to have those conversations. And again, if you go back to your specific objectives, so if you're at a one-to-one, she's late with her deadlines, you will go back to, well, how's your performance going? How are you finding the objectives at the moment? She probably will know she's being late. She might not know. And at some point you will have to give her that feedback. We'll come on to feedback shortly. But at some point you will have to give her the feedback. You can only dance around the conversation for so long, and then you'll have to have that. But this is the best way to bring this out, because there is probably something going on in Sue's life, creating her to be late with deadlines, to take long lunches, etc. And that's why a one-to-one is a really good format. If you were to go straight to a disciplinary, which is an option, you need some facts, because you can't go to a disciplinary with what ifs and I just feel you're a bit rubbish at the moment. You need facts. You need to have your, again, go back to your data, your SMART objectives. You need to know that she's being late and the detriment that that's having potentially on customers. So if you were considering going to a disciplinary, just make sure you do it appropriately, gather your facts beforehand, make sure you have enough data to warrant taking her through to a disciplinary, and obviously follow a disciplinary policy if you have one, so that you're going through it the right way, involving a companion, giving sufficient notice, etc. But in this instance, I'd say it's probably best to go down the one-to-one routes to be sure you're understanding all the facts before you then decide to go to a disciplinary. Okay, thank you for your honest input, everybody. If we move on to the next slide, we're looking now at giving feedback, and this is an area where a lot of people struggle, because nobody likes really giving poor feedback, but it's often the feedback that is needed to help improve a situation. So my advice in giving feedback is to consider, first of all, with how people are going to be feeling at this stage. If we think about Sue at the moment, if we're considering giving Sue some of this feedback, we need to think about her entire situation. We need to think about, she's been employed for a year. She started really well. She was positive, and she's obviously had something happen in the last 3 months which have created a negative sort of atmosphere or outlook and caused her to be late. So think about her situation. I would say she's probably going through something which we don't know what it is, but there is probably something that's happening in the background that we would like to understand more. So that's the first thing I would anticipate. Sue, depending on her age, she might be dealing with young children, she might be dealing with aged parents, she might be dealing with an illness. There's all sorts of reasons why people can have issues. So you may have some heads up about that, you may not. But if you do, just consider all of that information. Now, I always say, start with the positive. It's a feedback sandwich. I'm sure some of you would have heard of this before. Start with the positive. You want to give her good positive feedback. So Sue, when she began working a year ago, she was so positive, and I'd be using your examples from your one-to-ones where she was positive and very proactive. So I'd be saying, again, we'll go back to the comment about showcasing good behavior. If you say that's good behavior, people can understand what it is that you're referring to. So I'd be saying to her, let's assume it's a 6-monthly appraisal. You've done all the initial conversation and you're at the feedback point. I'd be saying, oh, it was so great when you joined the business, such a positive atmosphere. Remember when you spoke to the team and you said blah, 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 and they responded with blah, 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 blah. Be very specific. Give her good examples where you liked how she performed so she knows what you like to see. The other thing with feedback is, obviously the specific nature is important, but the impact is what makes it more invaluable to understand. So when you were talking to the team when you first joined and you said A, B, and C, they responded with so-and-so. They were really impressed and really understood what they had to do, and consequently they all achieved their objectives for the next 2 months. That's the impact of your behavior, Sue. Give her the whole situation. Don't just say you were really good with your team, because it brings it to life. It makes her understand what you like to see, but it also shows her the impact it's had on other people. That's the key in giving feedback, the impact. I also consider offering alternatives. So in the event that you're giving negative feedback, and we're going to have to give Sue some negative feedback, we've obviously started with the positive feedback, which is what we've just discussed. We then go back to our feedback sandwich, and we have the bit in the middle, which isn't so positive. And this instance, it's going to be, I've noticed, you could ask with a question. Again, I always start with an open question. How have you been with your deadlines recently, Sue? Simple question, not a negative question. Open question. How have you been with your deadlines? Now, Sue will probably know she's missed her deadlines. So she might say, oh, yes, not been as good with my deadlines. Yes, I've noticed that as well, Sue. So she's brought the actual feedback to the table. You've prompted her with an open question. How have your deadlines been, Sue? She's told you they're late. You can reaffirm, yes, I agree with you, Sue, they have been late. And be specific. I've noticed that on the last 5 weeks stats, you were 75%. You know your stats are required to be at 85%. What's happened? Open question. What's happened? You're not hitting her with a hammer. You're just asking her what's happened. She will explain, gosh, yeah, I saw that my first week was late. Just been really struggling at home. Can't really get my head in the right place when I'm at work. And then the next 4 weeks dropped again. Ever so sorry. Okay, so what's happened, Sue? Again, open question. At this point, you have not been negative. You have not hit her with a hammer. You have just asked open questions.
We're looking for white stools with grey seats.
Sorry, if you could just mute your laptops, guys, that'd be great. Thank you. So you're not at any point yet really coming in with her. You've been late for 4 or 5 weeks in a row and I'm not happy. You've done none of that. You've been very supportive and you've just asked open questions. Now, where I say offer alternatives, this is where you can be really clever, and rather than giving her a big hit on the head, you can say, okay, yes, you have been late, Sue. Let's talk about that. And you've already asked her what happened. She might have told you a bit more detail about her personal situation. You're offering alternatives now by saying, what else could you do? And you're starting to explore what might be a solution. Again, you've not given her anything yet. You've asked her, what else can you do? How else could you achieve your objectives when you're feeling that way? Or when you're dealing with that personal situation, what other things could you focus on? How else could you achieve your objectives? And it might be that together you come up with, you need support from another team member, you need extra checking. I don't know what the solution would be, but you're not telling her, this is how I want it. You're discussing different options. You can offer some options. You could say, would it help if I took some of the work away, or would it help if I gave you another resource to deal with those final set of tasks? So you're together working on an approach, and equally this approach should be smart. So it should be specific, it should be measurable, it should be time bound. So it's not just going to be okay, take as much time as you want and just get on with it. It's trying to be specific with what alternatives you're giving Sue to make that change of behavior that's needed. We look at what is the change that's needed, and with the change, it's not just about the deadlines. It might be about an awareness of how she's coming across. So again, rather than saying something too negative, you can ask her a nice open question. What impact do you think that the deadlines is having on yourself, or missing the deadlines is having on yourself? What impact is it having on other people? Again, go back to your open questions and try to get her to feed the conversation rather than you, as I keep saying, hitting her with that hammer. Aim for balance. Finish the conversation, the feedback conversation, with a nice bit of feedback. And you could finish it by saying, you know, you were really positive when you joined. I love the positivity that you bring to the team, and I really want to help you get back to that place. So you're showing that you're supportive. You're not just saying you keep missing your deadlines and I'm not going to put up with it anymore. Listen about what she's telling you. Listening is so important, because you can assume, but you have to listen to what she's telling you, because it might not be what you're thinking is the problem. And the last point on feedback is, I always say quantity is very, very important, because if you're hitting her with, you know, you're late with your deadlines and you've got a rubbish attitude, and you're no longer proactive, all she'll hear is you're late with deadlines. She probably won't hear anymore. So hit her with the one that's most significant, because the impact of being late with deadlines is often very visible to see. The impact is of your or trying to define or articulate what positive is a lot more difficult. And if you hit with all of that in one go, she's probably just going to slide under the desk and crumble. So think about the amount of feedback you give. Okay, let's just move on to the next slide, please. I've already said this in a way that feedback is there to help people. It's not there to get people out. It's there to understand people. And it is really powerful when you're using feedback from not just you as a manager, but other employees. And it doesn't just have to be an appraisal to do 360 feedback. You can put that process in place as part of your regular one-to-ones. Just get some feedback from other people. You can have a feedback box. You can do it in so many ways, but it just makes it more holistic and meaningful when you're getting more than just your manager's feedback. So three things to remember. The acronym, or the word is AID. So when you're giving feedback, you want to make sure you're showing and discussing the actions that the person is doing, both well or poorly. What is it that they're not doing so well, or that they're doing very well? Think about the impact that action is having on themselves, on other people, on the business. And that impact is significant. It's when it brings the feedback to life. And the desired outcome. So how would you like the person to do that particular thing in a better way, particularly for negative feedback? So what you would like to see. I'd like it when you're engaged with the team and they're really, really responding well to you. Come up with a specific outcome that you would like to see. And if you give those 3 areas in your feedback, then it's often going to be better received than when you just hit them with you're late with your deadlines for 4 months in a row, because no one likes to hear that. No one's going to listen to that. And go back to your open questions as much as you can. I used to have a list of open questions on my desk, which I would use for all sorts of situations, but are just really good questions. So things like, you know, what do you want to achieve with that? How do you think you're going to go about doing it? What does reality look like? My best question that I will use when I coach people, particularly, I often say, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it and change the situation, what would you do? Because it's just thinking a bit more creatively about how you can improve something, and even how you can improve something you're doing well. Because like I said earlier, development is not just about improving negative situations. Everybody can improve, and it's just showcasing where people can continue to inspire and do better, even for those people who are achieving good things. Keep stretching people, get the best out of your people. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I have another case study for you. So this time we have Paul, who is a carpenter. Now, Paul has a negative attitude. He appears to loathe his job, and he's bringing all the other team members around him down. Now, Paul actually worked on a project earlier in the year where he was able to focus on some analytical skills, and the results were extremely positive. So we're coming up to an appraisal. How would you approach Paul? So just have a think about that before we move on. So let's have a look. What should we do? So you've got Paul. Should you give him the negative feedback about his negative attitude and explain he won't get a bonus? Or should you ignore the negative feedback and hope he would improve and go back to the way he was earlier in the year? Or should you ask him to rate his performance over the year and then give him your feedback? Have a think about that. Please be honest. Don't just say what you think I want to hear. Say what you would do or what you think you should do. Okay, so we're currently all on asking him to rate his performance. Good. Anybody else completing? Okay. So we have 100% ask him to rate his performance over the year and then give your feedback, which is great. You've been listening, yes. Honestly, you know, there are many ways to answer this question, but that's a great way to go about it. So nice open question. Obviously, Paul is currently feeling very negative, and it's impacting the rest of the team. So if you go into the appraisal and he's going to lead the discussion, you're going to get him to rate himself on his performance. Tell us how you feel, Paul. What's it been like for the last 6 months or the year? He's going to explain, well, actually, he's feeling a bit disgruntled at the moment. So he wants a bonus or he wants a pay rise or whatever he's feeling. And you can echo and agree. Yes, I agree with you. You have seemed a little bit off the game lately. You've not been feeling yourself, it looks like, and the impact. So here we go into the impact. And I'm so glad you raised that, Paul, because I wanted to discuss that and see how you are. The impact on the rest of the team is blah, blah, blah. And I'd love it if you could be back on form in terms of the way you were, and you're really positive at the start of the year, and start to go into what you would like to see. You've got a great opportunity here because you've seen that earlier in the year, Paul was really, really effective using analytical skills. So you've got a great opportunity here to explore that set of skills about, is there any way that you as a business can use the analytical skills? He's a carpenter, so he's probably not going to be using that much of an analytical brain apart from analysing measurements and so on in building whatever he's building. Is there any other way the business can use that? And this is where I go back to the talent management piece around, okay, we have a business, we are employing carpenters, but we're also maybe short in certain areas. And perhaps Paul is somebody we could develop because we know he's got some great analytical skills with the project he did. Let's talk here about where Paul wants to go. And this is where pure, proper performance management comes to light. So let's explore those analytical skills. So you have your appraisal, and we've talked about what that is covered previously today. And then we talk about, okay, well, what's next for you, Paul? What do you want to do? And if we go on to my next slide, we are then talking about the development phase of appraisals. Now, often I see people running appraisals, and at this stage, there is no conversation left because managers have unfortunately hit people over the head too much with perhaps negative feedback or not given enough specific information in those appraisals. They've not given enough positive feedback. They've not been honest and effective in giving any negative feedback. So when you get to this stage of the appraisal, people don't want to listen. They're out of there. They've shut off when you've said you've been late with the last 4 months deadlines, and they won't hear anything more. They're not going to want to talk about development because you've just told them how rubbish they are. But if you do all that previous section well, you're now at a point where you're talking about how you can both win from this conversation. So how the individual, i.e. Paul, who we've talked about, can potentially develop, and if he wants to, do something more in the business using his analytical skills. Or we can also talk about, as a business, the skills gaps that you currently have, potentially, which involve analytical skills. And maybe Paul's not ready yet. He's a carpenter. It might take him 1 to 5 years to get ready, but you can start a journey with Paul to really benefit the business, rather than having to go outside, spending fortunes to recruit that analytical set of skills. So developing people, if you do your first bit right, you get to the section in your appraisal. This is a really key part of the discussion and should be driven from a win-win situation. What does the business need? What are the key skills that we're missing? What is the future in terms of external factors on the business? What is it going to look like the business is evolving to? What types of skills do we need in the future? And what have we currently got in the business? Who can we develop? Use this time to go and explore this in more detail. And equally, people will feel that they are wanted. They'll feel engaged, that the business is taking the time to try and develop them. And as I say in this slide here, improvement doesn't happen on its own. Most people will assume they're doing their best and that that's what they've got to give, unless they can be shown what better might look like. So for Paul, you can say, okay, so what is the future for you? And you start to explore those analytical skills, and suddenly you've opened a whole new door for Paul, which might excite him. And he's currently got a negative attitude because he's fed up of doing his carpentry skills. Suddenly you're talking about perhaps moving across to the accounts team or wherever it might be, using those analytical skills that he has because you've seen him using those. And suddenly he's been shown, well, this could be what you could do. And it will drive engagement within the business. So development of people is essential. So if we just move on to the next slide. And again, it doesn't have to be anything too detailed, but I would say development should focus on not just your current position, but also future positions. So you're going to look at your current position. So maybe Paul, in this instance, who is still a very valuable member of the team as a carpenter, he has some good skills and he needs to stay and develop in his current position, and give him the feedback, which, using the model we discussed, the AID model, and give him examples, give him impact, give him options about what could change, and talk about how he could develop more so as a carpenter and where he sees the next 6-12 months, what he should be doing, and focus on that side of things. Talk about what needs to change and talk about the impact that the business might have and some of the stresses on the business and what you need from him as a business. There might be some stuff that he needs to do which might require development from other people. You might need to get him a coach, someone who can just showcase some of the things you'd like him to do. It might not be that significant, but talk about what does it look like? How can we get you from being here to here? And I often use a scale of 1 to 10 or whatever number scale you want to use. So ask the individual, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. How effective are you currently as a carpenter? Get them to rate. And how effective would you like to be as a carpenter? Get them to rate. Now, they might sit there and say, I'm a 10. Great. But again, go back to your specific measures if you need to challenge that, to explain, well, actually, no, you're not a 10 because we've already discussed the areas of development or the areas of feedback. And use that scale, 1 to 10, how are we going to get you to a 10? And let's, again, give the emphasis to them. How do you think you can get to a 10? What can you do? You're not there to come up with all the solutions. I'd be getting them as much as possible to be coming up with these ideas. And they might say, oh, I need to go on a course to fine tune my carpentry skills, or I might need to just get some support in this particular area. Okay, let's talk about how we can do that. So current position, get them to own it, get them to come up with the ideas, and you as a manager will support that. You might need to add in a few ideas of your own, but they should be owning their own development plan. If we then move on to the next slide, we look at the future position. So this is where, again, it goes back to what we discussed earlier with Paul. So let's talk about your areas of interest moving forwards. And without being a career coach or trying to be something that you're not, these are the sorts of things you're going to be looking at. And again, people will be saying, well, why do I want to develop somebody to leave? Well, you're not. You should be developing this person to fill a gap that you have as a business. So go back to your identify what are the critical skills that you as a business need. What are the critical skills that you as a business are short in? And then go one step further. What are the critical positions that you have at the moment that might be vacant? They might have somebody in there that is about to retire. They might have somebody in there that is going to leave. Think about your vacancies, your critical positions that might become vacant, or that there is a shortage in the industry. And if that person happened to disappear off the face of the earth, get run over by a bus, whatever, suddenly you're going to be exposed as a business. So this is where you as a business should be coming to the table with some ideas about what is a potential area of interest for this individual. So ask the individual, what are your strengths? They might say, let's go back to Paul. Paul might say, okay, I'm very analytical. We discussed that in my feedback. Great. Have you considered a position which requires more sort of number analysis? Have you thought about something like that and have that discussion? You can present Paul with some of the positions that you have as a business that, yes, he might not be ready for yet, but certainly in another couple of years, he could be certainly developed for. Talk about what that looks like for him. Talk about if he's interested. The other thing I would talk about at some point is Paul's set of values, what's important. Now, hopefully when you're recruiting people anyway, you're recruiting against values. Your business hopefully has a set of values that you feel are important, even if you've not sung them from the rooftops and defined them for everybody. You know that it might be something like commitment to customers, it might be transparency, it might be teamwork. They might be 3 of your values. Talk to Paul about, okay, well, these are the values that the business has. I notice you're particularly good in these areas, and try and align what his next steps are with his values. Or it might be that Paul really has a value of fairness, and you know that to put somebody in the accounts team who calibrates and analyzes data in a fair way could be a great match. So think about those values and how you can use what he really truly believes. And talk about career goals, and be as open to talk about next 12 months. It's probably still as a carpenter. Okay, 2 to 3 years, 1 to 3 years. Where do you see yourself? And put it down in black and white, 5 years plus, and have these open conversations. Consider training, consider any development that might be required, and put some dates and some milestones in place, and keep this development plan as an ongoing document. It's his development plan, Paul. He will own this. He should be the one driving this. You're as a business there to support that and hopefully match it to the business needs, but he should own this development plan. And that is, in essence, what I would suggest to do on the tail end of the performance appraisal. Have this development plan. You can have this development plan brought to life throughout the one-to-ones. You can still refer to it. Things might change. He might suddenly decide, actually, nope, I really want to become a team leader now. I don't want to use my analytical skills. I want to lead a team of carpenters. Fine, and tweak it as you go. But it's up to him to have this document and to bring it to life as much as he wishes. So in essence, that is the performance management cycle. We've talked today about a lot of things, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing most of these things already, but I think it's really, really important that you have appropriate policies and support structure that allow you to deploy these areas. So performance management, I would see a performance management policy that sits alongside everything you're doing, and that explains how it's going to happen. We talked about having a capability policy, so anybody that perhaps behaviourally isn't up to speed, isn't performing at the right level in terms of their behaviours, and you've explored those behaviours through one-to-ones, you've given feedback, you've tried to understand the reasons why, and you've still not progressed, you will be going through a capability policy and using that set of instructions to proceed. Equally, anybody that is failing to do something because they purposely are going against the objectives, the contract, etc., then you will be using a disciplinary policy. So there are a set of policies and processes that I would like to encourage people to put in place if you haven't got already. You've also got, there's policies for everything. You've also got training policies. If you are putting in place training and development for individuals, I would always encourage people, particularly for expensive training courses, to put in place a training agreement, so that should somebody leave the organisation before 6 months, say, post-training, you've got a clawback scale and an agreement that you can reclaim those monies if people did happen to leave soon after that training was deployed. So the whole thing with any of these people processes is to make sure you have the right structure in place that supports these processes.